Hi, everyone. Welcome to Art Past Present. It's great to see everyone today. My name is Anna Rose. I'm the Exhibition and Programming Associate at the Wende. And thanks so much for joining us. Art Past Present is a monthly series. It's focused on the significance of memory and history in contemporary artwork. And we're so happy to welcome Chelle Barbour today. She's a multimedia artist, public speaker, and independent curator. She studied at UCLA and USC Roski School of Art and Design. And her work has expanded into a fully engaged art practice of curating, writing, photography, digital video, collage, and painting. Her collage work, which you just saw on the PowerPoint, imagines the body of the Black female through the lens of Afro-Surrealism. Her collage and photographic works are in the permanent collections of the California African American Museum, the Photographic Archive at the Getty Museum, Bank of America, among many other institutions and collections. Barbour has participated in many group exhibitions and collaborations, like the Black Lives Matter Public Art Project at the Hollywood Forever Cemetery, and Simone Lee's International Black Women Artists for Black Lives Matter project at the Project Row Houses in Houston, Texas. And in 2018, she had a solo show at Band of Vice's gallery in LA called You Is Pretty, Surrealism and the Black Imaginary. That was curated by Angela Bassett. She's a frequent collaborator at the Wende. She was one of the 3 contemporary artists who were part of our 2019 exhibition, Medea, Insurrection, Radical Women Artists Behind the Iron Curtain. And she also has work in our current exhibition, Transformations, Living Room to Flea Market to Museum to Art, which is about how objects change meaning according to time and context. And her collages in the show artistically reappropriate objects found in earlier sections of the exhibition. And in the chat, there'll be a link to see the virtual tour of that exhibition if you're curious. So this will be about a 45-minute conversation between Farrah Karapetian, Joes Segal, and Chelle. After that, there'll be about 15 minutes for audience Q&A. So please get your questions ready to put in the Q&A box during that time. As always, we appreciate everyone's questions, but please keep your questions concise and no longer than a sentence or 2. And if you have comments that aren't questions, please put them in the chat box because we have that function open. And it's always nice to see what city people are tuning in from. And if you want to say hi. Lastly, we'd like to thank Susan Horowitz and Rick Feldman for generously supporting discussion series at the Wende and our virtual programs. And now Joes and Farrah will get us started with the conversation. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Anna Rose and Chelle. So wonderful to have you with us today. Welcome to Art Past Present. And maybe I can just start with the title, Art Past Present, because I have a question for you about the concept of time in your work. You have mentioned in your artist statements that both Afro-Surrealism and Afrofuturism are sources of inspiration for you. And then, according to D. Scott Miller in his manifesto of Afro-Surrealism from 2009, he explains the difference between the two and basically saying Afrofuturism relates to the future, Afro-Surrealism relates to the present. And then, of course, in your work, the past also plays an important role. So how do you see past, present, and future coming together in your work?
Well, I really, I have to look at the global, look at Afro-Surrealism from the origin. When I say that, I'm thinking in terms of Pan-Africanism. When Kwame Nkrumah was talking about unity for all African American and its descendants, which inspired the Harlem Renaissance. And in the 1920s, 30s, when Aimé Césaire, Leopold Senghor, Suzanne Césaire were in school in Paris, they were really talking about negritude, raising the Black consciousness. At that time, they didn't want to be marginalized because they were coming from Martinique, and Martinique is a British, a French colony. So when they went to France, they felt that they didn't have to be, they didn't need to be marginalized. They were French citizens. And so this whole notion of raising Black consciousness, really impacted, their lives and African Americans' lives as well. When we look at, when I start, thinking about W.B. Du Bois, his participation in, an influence on negritude and Black identity and the quest for Black independence. I start thinking further about Amiri Baraka, who was looking at the works of, reading the works of Henry Dumas. And Henry Dumas's works were so, according to Amiri Baraka, they were so otherworldly that he started, referring to them as surreal. Mm-hmm. And then he coined the term Afro-surrealism, because that experience, the Black experience, was just so different than the average person's, experience, that, it was just beyond surreal. And so, D. Scott Miller, I was reading something about D. Scott Miller's conversation with Amiri Baraka, who said that Afro-surrealism is just not a Black thing. It could be Asian and it can be Latin. Mm. And so, Amiri Baraka, sort of, backed off of the Afro-surrealism and was more open to the fact that, other, people of color could experience a very similar type of surrealism. So, right. I believe that, my work, how I look at, the past and present and future coming together, I think about Pan-Africanism, I think about the unity, I think about negritude, raising consciousness. When people are looking at my work, I want to raise their consciousness. I want to take them somewhere else when they're viewing the work. I want them to see elements, in the work and think about where they come from. It could be a theme, it could be like, for example, in my show at Band Devices, there were 18 different images on the wall, and each one was different. And, there were, as I was working through those art pieces, each one had a different meaning for me. Mm-hmm. It could have been a result of reading the newspaper. It could have been a result of something that my grandmother may have told me. They came from so many different experiences and things that I had read, and the culture, what was happening in the culture at the time. As we get along, in our discussion, Black Lives Matter was very significant when I was working on my pieces. Right. And there are some pieces that it made me want to create images of warriors, women as warriors, because that's the way I felt. That's how I felt about the Black Lives Matter, founders, Patrisse Cullors. She was a warrior to me. So I was thinking in terms of, warriors. I think in terms of ways of, escapism, in the work. So, surrealism has so much to do with, absurdity of thought, and a combination of, for me, détournement. I will take an image and completely erase, the history of that image, and remove the eyes, remove the nose, remove any kind of reference to what it was, to create a new narrative.
Right.
And so that's one of the things that I love about my work, about producing works, whether it's, you know, surrealism or futurism, and those two are distinctly different. And that was what I love about Pan-Africanism, is that when you look at Pan-Africanism works coming out of, you know, that movement, it was distinctly African. Right. You knew it when you see it, you know it when you see it. And it's evolved, and you see you know, more contemporary Pan-Africanism, and you also can see that it's distinctly African. And in my work, what I want people to see, when they see a work now, people are starting to, you know, get, oh, that's a Chelle Barbour. I had to work a long time to get to this point of having a particular signature in my work that looks at the past, present, and future. You know, it took me a while, several iterations of my art practice. You know, when I started, you know, I was working in more of doing more déterrement. And when people looked at the work, they thought it was a Mark Bradford. And I was like, no, this is a Chelle Barbour. And then I began to, you know, reassess my practice and look at other ways of producing more figuratively. So I created, you know, pieces, and individual, you know, different responses were, well, they looked like Wende Museum. And I love her work, you know, I wasn't familiar with it at the time, but when I saw it, I saw that it was very much like Wende Museum's, incorporating watercolor and collage. And so I continued to work, and I finally, you know, hit my stride. I found something that I liked and loved, and I began to create it. And I seriously, I was like really obsessed, and I was like, I gotta do a lot of these. I gotta do like 50 of these right now, so that people know that this is my signature. You know, when they saw it, they knew it was me. So so I feel very comfortable. I feel very comfortable in my skin and in my art practice at this juncture, with specifically the collage, you know, portraiture, because I think that it's, you know, it's really looking at elevating the consciousness. I think it incorporates everything that Afrofuturism, Afro-surrealism, the movement promotes. So.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad to hear that you speak as you know, as inspired from that earlier kind of Caribbean and Pan-African movement. I think I've associated the work with the way it's been written about in terms of Amiri Baraka and the Black Arts movement and Afro-surrealism of kind of mid-century period. But that earlier period is so exciting to me, especially in terms of the women who led it. You know, in Paris, in the salons of Paulette Nardal, and how Black internationalism, the phrase Black is beautiful, was born there in the conversations about, like, am I Afro-Latin? Am I African and French? You know, what is my relationship to Africa? And what is my relationship to the Harlem Renaissance, as those people kind of came through those salons? So there's so much useful information in that period about, you know, how we can potentially think and reimagine today. I'm really glad to hear you rely on that history as well and resuscitate it in the work. But I guess that leads me to my kind of inquiry around gender, because I know that you've written about gender, especially in the diasporagasm essay. You wrote about it there in terms of how gender is perceived in a variety of Black artists' work. And since I'm so inspired by the movement, from the Nardals to the Césaires, you know, Suzanne's work being so so important in the turn towards surrealism as a route to find identity at the time. Suzanne more than her husband. I'm curious how you see gender as a factor in your work, as a factor in your character, of course, but also as a factor in the work, and what histories have influenced that. Maybe the Pan-African one, but others?
Yeah, I think that I really believe that the Pan-African one is key, you know, because part of gender is raising Black consciousness is essential to understanding gender, to accepting gender. And I know that we know that in the Black community, being queer historically has been problematic based on the church, on Black Christianity. And so when I look at gender in my work, I know that today there's so many, different markers for gender. What is gender? You talk to a young person and they're like, call me they. And I have an art piece. There's an art piece. I don't know which number it is, but
should we pull it up?
It's in there. Yeah, you could pull it up. Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah, there it is.
Magic.
Yeah, this piece, when I was creating this artwork, I can go, I want you to see that I can go from, in my mind, I'm thinking about gender, androgyny, the need for the viewer to see where I'm coming from in terms of the acceptance of all gender, all references to gender, the wide LGBTQ XYZ labels that are attached. I think the more that we see it, the more it's accepted, the more that we look at gender from an open hand, and not so traditional. It really for me, it helps me. It helps me to create. It helps me to look at works and not be so definitive in making something feminine. So there's a feminine piece, the frilly piece that appeals to a lot of people who see that in themselves. And when people go into a gallery, they see the androgynous piece, and and they relate more to that. I think gender is so critical in how we look at things today, because it's where we are. Gender. I would like to say gender neutral. But in my work, I like to bring it all to the surface. If I read stories, if I see images, if I see a person on the street that I might want to create them in my work, or they inspire the work. So gender is an open conversation for me.
So you have said about your work, or about the figures in your work, that they are looking back at you as the viewer, which I think is very interesting. You also mentioned that in creating your collages, you want to subvert the more traditional representation of Black women in art history, popular culture, etc., and give them agency and complexity. So how does this looking back at the viewer work for you?
before I answer that question, I was still thinking about the question that Farrah asked me. She had mentioned diasporagasm. In that exhibition that was curated by April Bay, it was after she had returned from Ghana. And in that exhibition, I believe it was like probably the first time that there was, a large number of Black queer artists producing, queer work. And it was different. It was complex because there were not, the question came up to for me. Someone asked me if a straight man produces queer work, what does that make him? Is he in the closet, or is he putting himself out there on paper or video, or what is it? And so that person's question really drove how I wrote that essay, because it was so it just had so many interesting layers. There were so many interesting layers in the work in that show. And if people missed it, it was unfortunate. It was at Sola Gallery, but yeah, there were a lot of complexities, a lot of layers to the notion of gender, how we look at gender, who is speaking to the subject of queerness, in Afrocentric works. So
yeah, we're so lucky to have the language around it right now. I think when I look at that moment between the wars in Paris, and I see, Paulette Nardal, is the first Black student at the Sorbonne, let alone woman. She's living alone as a woman from the Caribbean in Paris. And she and her sisters, who begin to also go to school there, speak to how it feels to be a woman in the city. And later she publishes in a journal she calls Woman in the City. She never marries, she never has children. She's really inventing a specific approach to being, gendered in her time. And simultaneously you have Claude Cahun, who's not Black, but who is inventing a word for herself in terms of being neuter. And so I think that these issues and representation have always been at play, but now we are lucky to have the language and the community around it. I think you pulled that out in your writing.
Yeah, and it's great to have the this queerness in the Black community, in the Black arts community, producing work that's related to a subject matter that has been difficult, amongst Black people. So, and that's just a historical thing, So anyway, moving to the next question that Joes asked me, if I can recall the question.
He's kind of talking about the gaze. Sorry.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Yes.
So, and also the figures in your collages looking back at the viewer, which reminded me, for instance, of Manet's Olympia, where all of a sudden a naked woman who used to be the subject or the object of the male gaze is very confrontational in looking at the viewer. How does that work for you?
Yeah, there's a piece. Can you turn the slide? It's the slide, I See Through You. Anyway, as you pull up the slide, I will say that, in terms of the gaze is really a trip. This piece, I created this piece, around this notion of the gaze. how people look at Black women in culture. Black women look nothing like this, but we're perceived to be a threat. Okay. And this piece, when you see it in person, it's very arresting. And it is the antithesis of the sapphire, the Jezebel, the so-called rude Black woman, loud, malicious woman that people, think of when they associate, these stereotypes of Black women that really at some point affect the Black woman's agency, because we are not those things. So when you look at the work, when I made that statement, the work is looking back at you. It came from my fear of being at my grandmother's house, my great grandmother's house, and there were photos on the wall. And every time I went to the restroom, I look at the pictures, and they were following me, and I was so scared. I was so scared. I was afraid to use the restroom at my great grandmother's house, because this notion that they're looking back at me and they're following me, I felt that gaze, was reversed. Is it flipped, the script was flipped on me as a child. I'm thinking that I'm going to look at photos, but no, the photos were looking at me and following me. So that notion has always stayed with me. And like when I created this piece, and when I create other works, they're looking at you. I select, the one thing that you'll notice in all of my work is that I will select eyes that are different from the eyes that were in the picture. So I may put a white person's eyes on a Black person's face, or Asian, or Latin American, or wherever, I will change that up so that it changes the gaze. When you see the different elements that are put in the works, it changes the narrative immediately. So when these works are looking at you, it's really examining the agency of the artwork itself, the agency of the viewer, and there's this interaction between the viewer and the work. Now, I don't know if that answers your question.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, as I begin to think about you and looking at these photographs at your grandmother's house, I also begin to think about other works, vernacular or fine art, with which you might have been in touch as you've moved through your practice. When you were in that show at Band of Vices, the masterpiece show, you were asked to engage with artists that are conventionally seen as masters, and I'm curious about with which work you engaged, and then what's that question of agency when you're engaging with something that's supposed to be a masterpiece, that's supposed to be from a master. Since you've just been talking about agency and the agency of the viewer, here you are asked to engage with the work of a master. What's your relationship to that word, master, masterpiece, and then where's your agency in that?
The work that I engaged for that show was Delacroix's. It was a Delacroix piece, and the request was to create something that was my interpretation of that, or reimagination of the piece. And it was the piece was a woman who was, at the moment, I can't remember the title. But this woman, you know, she's at war. Mm-hmm. She is the last, you know, standing, and she's taking on the basically the war. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking that this particular piece, in terms of master, how I approached it was to create, you know, a Black version of that. And, you know, how would this woman, how would I represent her strength, represent her, can you pull that up so that people can see that piece? So anyway, so I wanted to represent her strength and create a narrative around that was very similar, but I added another element. The element was the snake, and the snake, you know, in that particular piece related to transformation, mm-hmm. Because that's what the war suggested. You know, it would ultimately lead to a transformation.
I just put an install shot in the chat so that people can kind of sense the scale of that as well.
Yeah. Okay. My reference, how I feel as a master, I mean, working from collage to looking at, you know, Delacroix's work, you know, painting. I mean, we're talking about two different, you know, genres of work, two different periods of work, and you know, a different political system, different structure, different time, mm-hmm. You know. So, but the thing that is very similar are the women in these images, mm-hmm. And that's one of the reasons why I selected it, because of the strength of the woman. Mm-hmm. It didn't matter whether she was white, Black, Latino. Mm-hmm. It was the fact that here's a strong woman who's just been in a war, and she's standing, mm-hmm. and that is the kind of like the essence of what I want to, you know, convey, mm-hmm. is that, you know, if I look at myself as a master collage producer, you know, I see, you know, where I'm looking at socio-political, I'm looking at you know, various narratives. I'm looking at, you know, how I feel at a particular juncture. You know, what does, you know, in this situation, what does war mean to me? What does survival mean to me? What does leading mean? It's so complex. It was, you know, for me to work on that piece, I felt it was more complex than I thought it would be, mm-hmm. Because one, I wasn't painting, and which maybe I should have.
Now, you know, when I think of Delacroix, you know, I think of something that when the Afro-Surrealists and Caribbean Surrealists were first turning to Surrealism after World War I, they were thinking, you know, Western rational thought has failed. The values of the Enlightenment have failed. Everyone, all the Surrealists, not even just the Afro-Surrealists, looked at World War I and the horror of war and said, well, if we can do that, then, you know, the Enlightenment values mean nothing. Delacroix, all these people before this moment, what, you know, and they had to turn to the irrational. And I think that's what's so interesting, right. Your rewriting of that period, right? You choose something pre-revolution, you know, you choose something pre-World War I to rewrite in the language of the irrational.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's very irrational, and that's true. I mean, it was, to turn to the irrationality of life was a means of survival, because people could not, wrap their heads around what had happened. It was just so, I think the people were ready for for change. It's kind of like when we go through our particular government. We've been through this crazy dark period with Donald Trump. And now we're in the Biden administration, and there's like a sigh of relief, so yeah, when I look at the irrationality of Donald Trump, I wanted to do something more calm, more more fitting for the time. But the timing of this particular piece in relation to Delacroix, yeah, the irrationality of all these elements, like she's wearing a snakeskin, she's wearing a vase. These things make no sense. But what makes sense here is the symbolism, is a metaphor, because it's the metaphor that I selected, and that was a metaphor of transformation, of change between, and that's what the snakeskin is all about.
So it's almost time to go to the Q&A, and please.
Already?
Yeah, it goes so fast. So if you have questions, please put them under the Q&A box. Before we go there, I would like to ask you about your collaborations with Black Lives Matters. As Anna Rose already indicated, you worked on a public art project at the Hollywood Forever Cemetery in 2016. And another project with Simone Lee's International Black Women Artist for Black Lives Matters. Would you say that your collages are somehow maybe an artistic counterpoint to your political activism? Or how do you see the balance between your artistic work and your engagement? Is there any difference between it?
Black Lives Matter is an international civil rights group fighting for justice and liberty, and when I look at my work and what Black Lives Matter is doing, I can see I see a relationship between the two. The work at the Hollywood Cemetery, we were looking at, I worked with Zeal Harris on this collaboration, and we built a tree. And that tree had pictures. It was decorated with pictures of people who had been killed by police, by police force. And we had shoes, I believe the shoes were painted gold. And, that symbolism, there's a symbolism right there. The tree of life has these, people on it who are now deceased, who are no longer with us. Black Lives Matter for Black women. Black Lives Matter, Women for Black Lives Matter. That was more of a performance involvement at the Project Row Houses. How I see my work, kind of like reflecting. I see my work as a reflection of Black Lives Matter. The works that I create, they are warriors, as I said earlier. I see Black Lives Matter founders as warriors. I see the protesters as warriors. I would say that is the connection. I have, it's just so complex, because in the work that I'm producing, I'm elevating Black consciousness. Black Lives Matter is not only elevating Black consciousness, but the consciousness of the world about Black people. and so I think that, we're all, part of the same family, Pan-Africanism, Afrofuturism. We're looking at we're looking at a just world where Black people will thrive, Black ideas will live. So I just think that we're all one big family trying to, put our ideas out there, and let them stick. I think Black Lives Matter is doing a fabulous job. And, I've been honored to work with them on several occasions and produce more work.
Thank you so much, Chelle. We do have a question in the chat from Erin Maines. She writes, thank you, Chelle. I wonder if you can speak to the futurist aspect of your work. Do you see it as utopian or does it serve another function?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I see my Afrofuturist work as extremely utopian, because it's a world, Afrofuturism is looking to the future. Science, art. And I think that the pieces that I produce that are Afrofuturistic, they can be in the future. If you show a piece of there's a slide with, it's called Paving the Way Forward. And that slide is very utopian. So in answer to your question, that's the goal, is to make it as fantastical, as surreal as I can. I look at a lot of images. I look at other artists' collage works, just to make sure that I'm, in my own lane, and not copying people. This idea of utopia is something that, like Sun Ra was talking about. He wanted that utopian world. Sun Ra left Oakland because, the Black Panthers, he split with the philosophy of Black Panther movement, and he moved on. He started playing music. He went on tour because of that utopian difference. So yes, in answer to your question.
I feel like I've seen a lot of people over the course of the pandemic reading science fiction and kind of turning to alternative visions of the future, and new ideas of utopia, in a way I haven't felt for a while. And I see in our chat, there's a follow-up question about this question of Afrofuturism around gender. And, I guess to open that up so you can respond in any way that you feel to, what are the markers of utopian thought and the notion of the future now? We work with the Wende Museum as artists. We see what utopia looked like in mid-century. We see what utopia looked like, as you say, to Sun Ra in this moment in the 20th century. But what about now? What like odd kinds of markers of the future, gender maybe, but in any way you choose to respond? What are you finding?
What am I finding for the future in terms of, are you saying in terms of gender?
No, someone has asked, how do you see gender and Afrofuturism moving forward? And I'm opening that up also so that you can perhaps look for difference between 20th century and now. So like, the Cold War moment or the Sun Ra moment, people are looking at, space as a frontier or this or that as a frontier. What are the frontiers? Maybe in terms of gender, maybe in terms
of... I think in terms of gender, I would say that, Afrofuturism has been very heteronormative in the past. And I think going towards the future, Afrofuturism is more queer. I think there's more queer ideology that's mixed with Afrofuturism. So I think that, you know, it's going to head into a world of where gender is not a factor. You know, yes, for procreation, but gender is not the driving force behind, you know, the utopia. Mm-hmm. What's happening in the utopia is much more of an intellectual exercise between people, where commonality is more accepted than how you look. So I think that you know, race is not necessarily a factor, because everybody could be blue, you know, in that utopia. So I think that you know, right now when we look at society, there's this constant disengagement and disruption of power. You know, when I create these you know, Afrofuturist pieces, you know, they're interlocutors. You know, they're interlocutors for what could be in that utopian world, which are different, which are you know, gender free. You know, how liberating is that, to not have gender as something to oppress you, or have race as an oppressive factor, and just, you know, everyone can be free. You know, I'm like Sun Ra. We need to be free, liberated.
Right. We actually have a follow-up question from Nina Weisman. She writes, I was wondering about space and place in our context today of Mars exploration, huge reaches out in space. I was thinking of space is the place, Sun Ra, and you brought him up. Do you see yourself imagining also a place, a site for your subjects?
Oh, yes.
It's interesting, yes. In the utopian context, of course,
yes.
Utopia means no place. But
yeah. You know, they're everywhere, Nina. They're amongst us. If we look around, you know, I think that you might begin to see, if you think in terms of Afrofuturism, you might see people who look like those individuals who are from the future amongst us.
Oh, I like this response, Chelle, that we no longer have to look to the skies, that in fact the surreal embodiment of utopia is amongst us in banal vernacular landscape. This is good. Do we have another question from a person? We have Stacy Ford Bonnell asking about the relationship of, she says Afro orgasm, but I think maybe she also means diaspora orgasm.
Diasporgasm.
I cannot.
It's a mouthful.
I cannot say that. Diasporgasm. Diaspora.
Thanks, April. She would do something like that.
Diasporgasm. Can you say more about the relationship of diasporgasm to liberation?
Oh,
you've gone.
I'm panicking because I have a low power. My phone is in low power mode.
Mm. Well, we only have a few more minutes.
Okay, well, maybe it'll last. So I'm sorry, what was the question?
The relationship of diasporgasm to liberation.
Oh, the relationship between those two is very evident. You know, in the exhibition itself, it was liberating. The exhibition itself was liberating. I don't think any artist who was part of that show felt oppressed. There was no sign of repression in the work. It was joy. It was there was one artist who had videotaped. I think it was Jamal Tolbert. He was in a studio and a Black man passed by the studio. The guy was looking at his reflection, and Jamal noticed the man preening freely in the window. And he was looking at himself. He was looking at his muscles. And it was one of those moments that it was probably right, the most liberating, probably one of the most liberating videos I had seen in a gallery, where an artist captures someone in their natural state, being as liberated, as open, as just in his full body as that particular person was. So yeah, the liberation was at 10. On a scale of 1 to 10, it was a 10. It was lit.
I think every show should be rated on that scale. You know, yeah. We should have a liberation scale.
Yeah. Well, and speaking about liberation, Chelle, I wonder how you see the present moment, because the current political situation is so completely split. And do you feel that with your work or otherwise, there is any possibility at this point to reach beyond the split and move something, because we are so stuck right now?
Are we stuck?
Well, maybe not, but I think it's so hardly possible at this moment to have a real conversation with people who, for instance, don't agree about the same basic facts and don't agree about the meaning of society.
Yeah.
How do we overcome that situation?
You know, I agree. I agree with you. When you say that we're stuck, I mean, that's a really good word to describe it, because we've come out of 4 years of nationalism, and nothing else mattered. Nothing else mattered, you know, and it was very, I'm trying to be nice. I'm trying to be nice. But it was a very challenging period. And the divisiveness is so the divisiveness was just so palpable that people were just hot. You know, if you were on one side of the political table and on the other, nary the two should meet, because we're not getting anywhere. I think that it's going to take a couple of years before we begin to really relax into the trauma, the national trauma that we've experienced, and to become unstuck. I mean, over the last 6 weeks, we've experienced a stimulus payment. We experienced people becoming vaccinated, and the more we get returned to our normal lives, we can get out of this surreal moment, because this is as absurd as it comes. And I can't even create a collage that looks like what we've experienced, you know. But yeah, it's going to take us some time, but I think it will happen. We just have to keep working, and the work that we produced, you know, I think it should be probably more positive. You know, I know that when I recall being in art school. One of our professors said, "What's up with art students? Why is it the first thing they think of is angry art? Why does everybody want to produce angry art?" And that was something that stayed with me, because when I was producing my déterrement, and you know, and pulled paper, which, you know, Jacques de Vigler, a French artist, you know, he was my inspiration at that time. it was angry. It was political. It was like, I'm questioning, where are the revolutionaries? Where's Angela Davis? Where are all the people that should be, saying something right about now? And this is, pre Obama. And it just, it hit me, and it stays with me. So I try to make art that is more positive, because at the end of the day, we really want to escape whatever we're dealing with. We want a moment of calm. We want a moment of something that is fantastical, at least I do.
Well, Chelle, this is, I think, such a beautiful point to thank you for a wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Farrah. There was a lot to think about in your questions, and when I'm constantly thinking about my art practice, because I feel like every time I start a new work, I have a new narrative. I have a new way of looking at it. So it's dynamic in that sense, that it's not static, where I go, okay, so I'm making another collage, it doesn't come that quickly, so there's so many things politically, sociologically, culturally, that we're looking at, relationship wise, that drives the work. I still I always feel like I'm in a state of becoming. I'm still in a state of becoming. Nothing is ever static. So I'm constantly growing with my work and constantly asking myself questions, trying to understand more of what Afrofuturism, how the past, reflects the present, and how the present, reaches back to the past to make, to make a statement, to revise a narrative hopefully without recycling history too much. So
Wonderful.
That's my story.
And it's such a powerful one, and such a great way to integrate all these different layers in single images. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye, Farrah.
Bye-bye. And before we go, I want to mention that next week we have our next Cold War Spaces interview with art historian Sarah Blaylock, and we will be talking about the East German counterculture art scene in the 1980s. So lots to look forward to, and hope to see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you.